what's the role of the library, the ICT, where should the server be, and all that. But in the University of Jos, we had a mandate that all servers in the universities will move to the ICT Directorate. However, a year after, there was fire, and the servers got burnt, including that of the repository. Now, in terms of acceptability, of course, not all the academics found it necessary to be able to submit their publications, their conference proceedings, their research works for uploading into an open repository system because of the fear of the loss of intellectual property. We had to conduct several trainings and teach on how self-archiving could be done. We also, as a way of promoting the advocacy, highlighted the hits on the website to show that actually if they deposited their works, there would be more visibility, and it resulted in the data that you see here, and also the map that you can see. Can we move? Yes, that's the statistics of some of the, we had to present it to the staff in some of the trainings, and so many were surprised that they were receiving several hits for their articles. The next. Then we had this map that projected the various places in which people were accessing the works from the repository. And that was a very great motivation for the staff. In terms of deposit policy, the first that we had was that all academic staff who were putting up for promotion, they had to submit their publications to the library for upload into the IR. Then all digital copies of theses and dissertations were also mandated to be deposited in the library. In workflow, of course, digital hard copies were submitted, bound digital copies were also submitted, and we had to interrogate some of these copies to make sure that they followed required standards. We assigned metadata, and then we checked and assigned Creative Commons license. And then the research problem actually was to discover the need for the IR after 10 years. Was it achieving its intended aim? Was it just there? Or we were getting value for whatever we were doing? So that was the research problem. And the methodology was a social survey through observation, questionnaire administration, 200 questionnaires produced for students and academic staff. Now, the interesting thing, after administering the questionnaire and also focus group meetings for both academic staff, that's lecturers and students, there was a consensus, and we can see that both staffs and students agreed that the repository was a common place to have works deposited. There were slight differences, but the general understanding is that the repository served as a one-point center for collection of academic works, about 60% for both staff and students. Now, the question of whether they ever used the repository itself, so that it wouldn't appear as if we were just collecting publications were they being made use internally? We've seen the global access, but internally, were we using it? And it proved that most students, 39% to 32% of lecturers, were actually using this. I'm going ahead of you. Next slide. We also discovered, in terms of deposits, that more lecturers were not actually depositing their works in the repository. And in terms of usage for research, that's as a source base for research, we discovered that very, very few, very low percentage, both staff and students, less than 30%, were using this for their first port of call for research. Let's move faster. We've gone. Next slide. Yes. Then the contribution of open repository to knowledge. There is a common agreement, both by lecturers and students, next slide, both by lecturers and students, that it really does contribute. And particularly this interesting response from lecturers, that it removes the financial barriers to knowledge. And that also tells you how much economics plays in access to knowledge, in publication, in the libraries acquiring literature and being made available. Of course, for students, not many of them actually use this, but those that use, I also agree that it has some contribution to knowledge, which is the same thing we find here. Now, from this evidence before us, it's very clear that the institutional repository, I'm 2 slides ahead of you, is very clear that IR is yet to make the desirable impact on the university community. The awareness is still low after 10 years, and the question is, can this be attributed to ineffective promotion by library staff, even though continuous training had been done? Could it also be low technology adoption by the learning community, requiring a paradigm shift in learning? The promotion of IR through the focus group discussions, suggestions were made, particularly by students, that social media can be engaged, and some lecturers also suggested that the repository could serve as a starting point for literature review and the enforcement of deposit of IR, of publications. On the contribution to knowledge, it is evident that repositories are critical for consolidation and advancement of knowledge. Librarians, therefore, need to explore every acceptable means of getting their repositories used. Otherwise, there will be redundancy internally, even though access is made to these resources by outsiders. Probably discoverability strategy, how this can be discovered internally, and IR in UniJOS, which is also indicative of other IRs in the country. So far, we have not more than 22. That's the highest number that we have registered in the Registry of Open Access Repositories. The publicity it enjoyed at the beginning needs to be sustained. A paradigm shift is needed to engage students and lecturers in the use of technology for research, teaching, and learning. The library needs to mount innovative awareness programs. The critical conclusion that we can find from these trees are good, but they are as good as when they are used at the starting point. Creating repositories without use within the community may not serve the purposes, especially with the repositories having access to other literature sources. These need to be engaged, and it provides strong support for research and learning. Thank you so very much.
Thank you very much. I think I'm suggesting that we organize our questions so that we ask them together to the group, just to...
So it's my pleasure now to... Maybe you have to switch off. Okay. It's my pleasure now to present the presentation on behalf of my colleague. He could not come here, and there are some technical problems that he could not do the presentation on remote. It's about NADRE. Can you please bring it there? I brought some flyers to the first tables here. Please take it. We have website. Everything is on the website as well. NADRE is of Ethiopia. And somehow we start top-down. And that means first the national repository, and then we move on to the institutional repositories. But this is coincidentally, it worked out like that, and I will then come more to the story behind that, why we have started like that. In brief, the overview. Okay. Okay. Thank you very much. The outline. In brief, the history, how it comes to status we are right now, then the mission, the objectives, the methodology, stakeholders, and the responsibilities, and of course, at the end, we should then have the conclusion. All started with the UbuntuNet Alliance Conference, or UbuntuNet Connect Conference in 2017, where we had a pre-conference workshop. And at that conference, we had the state minister from science and technology, and he has then taken on. And the ideas that have been presented, build the SciGaia project. It is a Horizon 2020 project. It has been finished by the mid of 2017. Then, through this interest and the push from the Ministry of Science and Technology, the Ethiopian NREN came then in. And the Ethiopian NREN belongs to at that time belonged to the Ministry of Education. Now it's the Ministry of Science and Higher Education. And together with Ethernet, the Ethiopian NREN, we then started with a first conference. We call it Kickoff Conference, and we had pre- and post-conference workshops. But those librarians we have already invited prior to this venue to a library carpentry workshop. And in this library carpentry workshop, we started to create a certain community. And then we invited them to come to participate together with their vice presidents for academic affairs at that time. Now they are also vice presidents of research. And they attended workshops and the conference. In June 2018, we were then at the position to start the trainings out at the universities. We had 4 cluster universities, and we did first a data stewardship. Therefore, we had a soft start, and then in October we continued with the training how to set up an institutional repository in the cluster universities. It was still theoretical, quite theoretical, but nevertheless the librarians and the IT people from the libraries, they got some insights. And then in December 2018, formally the Minister of Science, or the Minister of Science and Higher Education, kicked off the implementation of the institutional at the universities. And we have for this, they will now be served by Ethernet to set up the repository. The managerial part comes then from my organization. This is the Education Strategy Center, and this is working for the higher education and for the TVET part. And the inauguration from NADRE is now then in July 2019. Oops. So, the mission of NADRE. NADRE intends to provide researchers, lecturers, students and stakeholders of Ethiopia with the research works published by Ethiopian universities. And it should provide also citizens access to research work. And it is also encouraged, or Ethiopian universities will be encouraged to build their own institutional repositories that then Ethernet, as the manager of the NADRE, will be in the position to harvest research works disposed on the institutional repository. What are the objectives? These are and Ethiopian researchers, and then it's also that in Ethiopia the education sector and the higher education sector primarily is seen as the engine of economic development. That means the more we can spread out research works, not just in the university level, but also to other universities, other researchers can build on that. And of course, as you might assume, that there is a certain selfishness of researchers. They don't want to share. We now have pushed the DOI, the Digital Object Identifier, that each artifact on the institutional repository and then later on the national, and the Digital Object Identifier is managed by Ethernet. The methodology, what we applied, first of all, we had the kickoff workshop and conference, and at that time already we have introduced the participants to the terms DOI and ORCID ID. And all the participants at the pre-conference workshops, at the post-conference workshops, they have received an ORCID ID whatever they do now with that, but at least they know it, they have it. And then we have started with a certain, a kind on the data stewardship on one side, and then on the engineering part, how to manage the repository once we have it. And we have done this in 4 cluster universities out in the country, in all the 4 regions. And what came out of that, of course, the trained people, but also we set up a website, we have a manual, and we have the NADRE, we have here the website, the National Repository. We have already quite some artifacts there, but it's still ongoing as long as the institutional repositories are not we wished. Can jump over that. Oops. No. I want to come to the stakeholders. Here are the stakeholders, what we have involved. There are mainly 4 Ethiopian stakeholders: the ministry, Ethernet as the national NRAN, then universities. The responsibilities. Let's start with the Ethernet responsibilities. First of all, to provide space on the cloud and servers to host the NADRE, the technical support. Then the DOI. They manage the DOI sub-prefixes. And to inform universities and research institutions how to request and obtain the DOI, and then also to train the local IT staff to work on the NADRE and the challenges coming with that. Then we have the Educational Strategy Center, my organization. Here we universities. Then we advise the users, that means the librarians and also the researchers, how to work with NADRE. We focus very much then also on the ORCID ID, how to use it. And then we organize workshops and tutorials for the university librarians. And we are also the bridge between NADRE and the ministry and let's say the National Repository and the ministry. Oops. We have then the universities. We have also quite a set of responsibilities, what we bring to them. First of all, that they bring to the NADRE. We don't discuss right now the open data issue because this is quite a political issue. We are already happy if we can go through with the open access issue. Then they have to disseminate NADRE, the value of NADRE, to their researchers. They have to keep the standards for the NADRE, what we require. And then they have to do the plagiarism check. This is all with the university. We don't interfere into that. And of course, they have to dispose the artifacts at the right collection on NADRE. That a lot of universities don't have their institutional repositories. It's Ethernet's mandate to assist the universities to provide them with the necessary soft and hardware skills to set up their institutional repositories. And yeah, FAIR principle is quite on the agenda. And what we also have found out that the National Repository is of special interest also for the TVET sector. We work on that and to reach out from university also to the TVET, which belongs now also to tertiary education in Ethiopia. So far, my presentation.
Thank you very much. Our next presenter is Abbott. I don't know how you want to do it. Do you want to go on the podium or you want? Okay. Please go ahead.
Thank you.
Please redeem the time.
Redeem the time, he says. Okay, good afternoon, everyone. So my name is Pamela Abbott, and I am a senior lecturer in information systems from the Information School, Sheffield University, United Kingdom. And this paper I'm presenting is part of a survey that was held in conjunction with a workshop called LibSense, which some of you will be aware of, which focuses on librarians' capabilities to deliver with the UbuntuNet Alliance conference in November 2018. And what I'm going to present to you today is some of the results of that survey. Before I do that, I will tell you what the presentation is going to be about. It's meant to be 8 minutes, I'm told, but this is what I want to present in 8 minutes. So the motivations, key questions, aims and objectives of this survey, the approach, the issues identified. Now the key thing here was that librarians from this region were asked to identify issues that they think that they had in terms of realizing the capabilities, that they're meant to evolve into in order to present these digital services to their, it's kind of the main part of the presentation. And then I'll give you some further information on where you can find more about the LibSense project and the survey. So now we move to the key questions, motivations, aims, and objectives. All right, so basically LibSense is an initiative that WACREN is running, and it came out of the successful Tandem project, an EU H2020 project, which was dealing mostly with advocacy of NREN services and also trying to identify the needs of universities and other higher educational institutions with regard to what NRENs could offer them. We identified institutional focal points in these same organizations who could help to drive forward the agenda of NREN advocacy. But at the same time as identifying this, we were also aware that there may have been some constraints in their environments that prevented them from being able to carry out this kind of role as institutional focal points. And that was mainly what did motivate the whole LibSense agenda. Now, these particular surveys that we are doing are focused around something called open access repositories, and we have identified them as a key digital information service that librarians need to be supporting due to many of the, you've heard to the two other speakers speaking in universities and higher education institutions. So we focused the survey around that. What are the necessary capabilities that librarians need to deliver on this particular service? So LibSense is focusing on some of these issues here. How can open access repositories operate embedded in NREN infrastructures and provide a foundation for an innovative, open, distributed and networked resource for scholarly communication and open science in Africa? Very big ideal there. And what are librarians' inputs for this kind of guiding framework around open access repositories? and what part does the upskilling of librarians' digital skills play in providing these guidelines? We thought that for this to work, that the librarian communities in these different regions, that's one set of players, the NRENs, and also content providers. Content providers we would normally identify as researchers and academics and students, people who are producing outputs for consumption, knowledge outputs for consumption. The librarian communities we thought would be well networked and also well placed to mobilize new policy and change policy and guide policy within their institutions. And the NRENs, of course, are technical, they're building infrastructure, they're building services. If we could find a way for all three of these different sets of people to work together, then maybe we could have sustainable e-infrastructure platforms like open access repositories being created. Towards this goal, we had the survey, and we were looking at ways in which we could identify what was constraining librarians from taking on this kind of very leading role in building, developing, creating OARs, and what was constraining them in their environments. So now, the approach. Basically, this is what we intend to do. So in each of the three regions, the Ubuntu Net Alliance region, WACREN, and ASREN, we are running these surveys. So we've already run the one in Ubuntu Net Alliance, which is I'm going to show you some of the results from today. We ran one in WACREN region, and we already had the workshop Monday and Tuesday in region in a month's time. Key partners involved in the LibSense initiative are WACREN, EIFL, which is the Electronic Information for Libraries, CORE, Confederation of Open Access Repositories, and Information School, University of Sheffield. We asked librarian consortia in the Ubuntu Net Alliance region, and WACREN region, and the ASREN regions to determine suitable people in the profession to answer this survey. So they've been canvassing their members to try to find people to answer the survey. So in the Ubuntu Net Alliance region, we distributed the questionnaire and got, we made 338 invitations to people. Is it there? Yeah. And 178 responses were received, 83 were incomplete, so we had 95 to use for our analysis. Response rate of about 28%. We also worked in conjunction with University of Lagos data analysts to help produce the statistics that you will see. So what I'm going to do now, I'm going to concentrate on the issues identified by the librarians. Because that was the main point of this, to actually draw out from them what they felt were needs that they had in order to improve their capabilities around OAR development and maintenance. So here, yeah. So lack of sufficient information about open access policy at the national level, they thought, and lack of implementation of open access repositories also at the national level. They did feel that there was sufficient activity at the institutional level around OAR development and operation, however, not enough formulation of policy related to this activity at the institutional level. So if you just looked at some of the graphs that we got from this, you will see here the first one, that issue about there being little or no national policy on OARs, and very few OARs in existence as reported by the librarians in that region. Institutional level OARs, much better. In the fourth quadrant, you will see that. So in the third quadrant, you will see that many were saying there is no policy really around the institutional repository, OAR repositories, even if they do exist. Some issues identified around institutional support. There were quite a few issues. I'm going to skip straight to the diagrams to show you what sort of things came up. It's trying to, yep, there we go. 84% said there were insufficient resources for digital information services. That's a huge percentage. When it came to support from the institution, they also pointed to areas they felt were weak. Expertise and consultants coming in to advise on digital areas, they felt that was the weakest. Funding for digital repositories also quite weak. Of course, then these areas need to be well supported. Looking at the technical function, they identified some issues, some areas where they felt they were lacking. Information architecture, networks, telecoms, and management came up as two important areas they felt they were lacking in. Still, keeping with the technical function, they also felt that they needed more expertise from outside to help train them in their technical roles. So they were lacking technical experts and lacking information experts from outside. Specific to open access repositories, training and awareness, we found that all the 4 categories we asked them about were reported on in very low numbers. So they felt overall that all of these 4 areas were just not covered well enough. To the development of librarians' digital skills, they felt that even though they did have enough continuing professional development available, when you looked at digital skills and when you looked at open access specific skills, it was lacking, as you will see from these graphs. So the first one, 67% say, yeah, we get enough continuing professional development. However, when you move to the next graph, you see that when it comes to digital skills, only 55% think they're getting enough training in digital skills. And worse yet, when you move to the open access, open science, all those the trainings and all the open movement initiatives, only 47% felt they were getting enough training in those areas, down into the specific areas in which they felt they were getting skills. 6 key challenges identified by the UbuntuNet Alliance region librarians were these that you're seeing here. The red ones are the ones that they mostly identified. These themes came up very, very often, the red ones. The yellow ones, sort of in the middle, and the green one was one that they didn't mention very much. But basically, in reading through those responses, they seem to feel, yes, there are issues with power and politics, and also they're feeling that they weren't influential enough in guiding policy around digital skills and digital services. In effect, the power and politics seemed to affect vision and strategy, which they felt they didn't have a lot of support. And that institutional provision of support would then support the development of capabilities. So if there isn't enough institutional provision of support, then there won't be enough capabilities built. Similarly, power and politics, they also felt, was influencing the perceptions around their professional issues, like their identity as librarians. And that, in effect, was also influencing what kind of capabilities they could develop as librarians, whether it would be more along the lines of digital or not digital. And if, in effect, the capabilities that they would have would enable them to manage more and more technical, more and more change in technology. Regarding their vision, I asked them to determine whether they thought they were central or peripheral to the organizations they were in, and whether they thought they were innovators or just providers of services. And the results we got were mostly those thinking that they had central roles, which is good, rather than peripheral. Although a good third of them thought they were peripheral to the institutions they were in. And similarly, 66% thought they were more service providers than innovators. When we put all of that together in a matrix, we got majority of them saying, you know, we think that the library actually is and probably will be a central force within their institution, but it will be a service provider. Now, I've come to the end. I'd like you to invite you to have a good look at the full report, because I've only given you some highlights. And this report is available at that website address you will see there. The report on the LibSense workshop is also available at the address you will see there. Any information you'd like to find out about LibSense itself, the WACREN LibSense initiative, can be available from the other link there. And finally, if you want to make any inquiries about LibSense, there's an email address you can send your information to. And I really hope I kept to decent time. Thank you.
Thank you very much for inviting me to give this presentation. My name is Kotei Nikoi. I work for the Kwame Nkrumah University of Science and Technology, which is the second biggest university, I dare say, in Ghana, in Kumasi, for those of you who are familiar. It is almost the MIT of Ghana, call it that, and you will be right. I also wear another hat, which is that I am the chairperson of the Consortium of Academic and Research Libraries in Ghana. So I speak wearing these two hats. What I'd like to do very simply is to tell you a little bit about something that we try to do in our university. What the presentation, I am going to talk about something which is has to do more with enhancing the learner experience, and so it is more focused on teaching and not research, if you bear with me. Basically, okay. Just to give you a bit of context to my presentation, we librarians, one of the challenges that we have had over the years is that students come to university to learn. They don't come for qualification, they come for education. And I think it is something that we all need to get used to. And they rely on learning resources provided by the library to enhance the learning experience. But librarians have always had a challenge in getting lecturers and academic staff to tell us what they need in order to teaching and learning representation. Traditionally, what you do is to go around the blog, speak to lecturers, ask them, email, and it has been a very major challenge all around the world for librarians when it comes to that. And therefore, the related challenge is how you even justify your budget when you don't have something to demonstrate as to what you need to buy in terms of the actual resource services that you provide. One solution that has been preferred in relation to this has to do with what is called reading list management systems. I don't know how many of you are familiar with this management system, but it is a learning resource management system. Some of you may know about Thalys Aspar. How many? Thalys Aspar? All right, wow, okay. That's interesting. Run by Loughborough, or the Loughborough Reading List Management System. So we decided that in order to resolve this challenge of time-consuming reading list development within our institutions, we're going to implement this reading list management system in KNUST, and perhaps the first in Ghana. So what we did was to go around very quickly to get a sense of what lecturers do and the behaviors. And it confirmed that a lot of them do not have a reading list. If one existed, it was not updated frequently, and therefore you wonder that how are they delivering the kind of teaching and the quality of teaching that you expect them to have. And that was very, very worrying for us. Like I said earlier on, we settled on an open source version, the Library Reading List Management System, because we wanted this to be a pilot, and so that we can test and robust and sophisticated, then we can do that. And as part of this process, we also developed what I'll call a reading list policy to reflect. A lot of librarians are used to collection development policies and not reading list policy. And the two are very different. And I don't think this is the time to maybe go into the details about what they represent. But we developed the reading list policy that will reflect the kind of resources that we need to provide in the library, the implications for the different formats that we go for, implications for how students access it, implications for library budget, and many other things. We submitted this to our University Library Committee, and then got approval for it. And therefore, we started to roll out the reading list management system. In KNUST, we have 6 colleges, and then start talking to academic staff about how best to implement this. What I'd like to share with you, we are still in the process and we haven't completed yet, but I wanted to share with you some of the challenges that we have faced since we started this process. I had a joke with one of my colleague friends here, Peter, when I just came in here. And I said, you ICT people, you don't like talking to librarians. You always want to do things in your corner. Don't you know that technology started in the library? And we had a kind of a laugh about that. But the first thing that I want to do, and I've gone on right straight to the, maybe the 3rd or 4th. So this is... Okay, what I didn't talk about was the ICT environment in K, which is very well networked. We have the capacity for bring your own device kind of services, and we think we are fairly okay, but there are still issues and challenges. And that is what I want to highlight in this presentation, mainly the challenges. All right, so we are here. So we've decided on open source instead of proprietary. Come on, God. Yeah. So let me focus on the challenges, which is what I want to do to redeem the time. One of the challenges that we found, like I have said earlier on, is the whole question of ignorance, all across the institution about the value of learning related. A lot of people come to university, they know how to use the internet here and there, and therefore they are well knowledgeable. And then you find that you start talking about learning related tools, and people are very, very ignorant about learning related tools. Tools that specifically address how learning and teaching and research are conducted. And if that will shock you, I would say that there is evidence within our institutions that we should address the issue of ignorance, both among academic staff and students, when it comes to implementation of learning-related tools. The other thing that we were confronted with in respect of this is the whole question of the degree of fragmentation of systems that we have in our institutions. You would find that there are systems internally that do not talk. Learning management system is sitting somewhere. There is a VLE also sitting somewhere. There's a course database sitting somewhere. And it confuses the end user when they come and they have to try and find where they start from. I want a system within my university where the end user can start, whether from the VLE or whatever, and access my reading list management system irrespective of where they actually launch themselves from. So the critical challenge that we are faced with is the whole question of the fragmentation of systems within our institutions and the need for us to join them up so that they can talk to each other. And that is a major problem that we were faced with, which we are still addressing. There is also the whole question about internet connectivity into our universities. It's across Africa and everything, and then internally, when you have delivered it, you find that there are still issues and challenges, and it is not working the way you want. I came home the other day, went into my house, I pressed the switch on the wall, and the lights wouldn't come on. But I knew there was electricity coming into the house. And then I discovered that the switch on the wall was broken. So although I had electricity delivered to my house, the broken switch was not allowing me to activate that and activate the service. And therefore, what we find are a lot of broken switches around our institutions where things are not the way we want them to be. One key example has to do with the quality of internet services that come into our universities. Internally, it is not working the way you want to. There is also the question, for those of you who are not familiar with the term, you can take this away from you. It is called dumso. 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 And dumso means that switch it on, switch it off. But it has to do with power supply within our institutions. That when you even have the internet, then you realize that power reliability becomes another major challenge for students accessing these particular resources when they come internally into the library, and that is something else that we also need to address. I am told that we have about half of the capacity of internet quality services in our institution compared to what we need to actually have. The third point, or fourth point, whatever, is the whole question of, and I think the earlier speaker mentioned it, it's about digital literacy. We assume that, students who come and academic staff in particular can use them. And then suddenly you realize that they are not as familiar with how these tools work compared to just searching the internet. And we need to address the whole issue of digital literacy in this whole craze about providing tools all over the place so that we can equip both staff and students with the necessary skills and competencies for using these tools. In fact, what I think maybe the students, I dare say this, are maybe better than some of the staff. You'll be surprised that a lot of staff, you introduce and mention things and they are like, what is this? And all that you are used to is their own small corner and the things that they use in respect of maybe their specific work. And anything beyond that, you find that there is some degree, the other thing that I think we need to address. And then finally, we need to think very critically about the whole question about pedagogical innovations within our institutions. Pedagogical innovations. We still have very archaic, antiquated Dickensian methods of delivering teaching and learning, to the point that when we have provided access to all these various tools and resources, people are still trapped in the mindset such that they are not using these resources. Libraries are spending huge amounts of money to actually provide access to these resources, and it is about time that we change the pedagogical models that we use so that all these institutional repository resources, library things that we buy, can be used effectively to deliver the quality of education, but not for qualification. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, all the four presenters. Maybe we should give them another round of applause. Because we are deep into our lunchtime break, I just want to suggest that the questions are taken together. So I hope people noted where they want to ask questions. And then you raise the questions, we will note them, and the presenters will respond to them. Are we on one page on that? Okay. So let's get the questions. If you can, please indicate to which presenter.
Thank you, moderator. Well, I join you again in appreciating all the four presenters. I think the issues raised are very important and germane to higher education development in Africa, not just in West Africa. My question will be directed to the librarian from the University of Jos, just in terms of, in fact, almost all of them, in terms of how do we encourage this commitment to the use of repositories in our institutions. I noticed that they identify a number of challenges. Perhaps we could put some incentives to encourage people to adopt use of repositories, just like in the World Bank, so as to encourage publications. So perhaps it can also help in promoting the use of repositories. Just a suggestion. Thank you.
Let's have more questions, please.
Okay. I'll speak in French, by the way. My question is for Stephen. Alors, Monsieur Stéphane, vous avez parlé des challenges que vous avez rencontrés.
The challenges that you had. I just want to ask you the question. What
Que les repositories soient adoptés par les universités et les usagers.
by the investors and the end users?
Ok, merci. En fait, je vais
Stephen, can you hear me?
question à la suite de
Mr. Stephen, can you hear me? Okay. Yeah, I'm putting in place an institutional repository. It's a good firm that will enable us to come out to our investors. So the repositories are supposed to bring us to share knowledge, and this should include all that you have as advantages and all that you have as diversities in Africa. Within our African ecosystem, we have our Central and West Africa regions, that is the WACREN. We have the Southern African part of Africa, that is the Ubuntu Alliance, and then ASREN in the northern part of the Africa. So we have these diverse regions of their diverse languages. So to come out of this kind of isolated, to try to break the language barriers so that we can also make use of the resources that we have from the various regions. So we need to take into account all these diverse components, especially in terms of the linguistic compositions of our regions, so that the African community should really become a coherent community for the sharing of knowledge. It is an African network for sharing of knowledge, so we have to think about this kind.
Not working very well here, but I noticed that Margaret may be bilingual, so she'll help us to know the last two questions. It goes fast, and then we can take another batch.
Thank you very much for the questions. Encouraging the use of repositories is a collective effort, because what we are observing is that so if they do not have faith in the system, then there is a major problem. However, from some of the experiments that we performed, that is showing the metrics of the works used, displaying the access, after we did that, there was a higher response. And we had one or two staff, lecturers, who got contacted from organizers of conference, from their own scientific community. One of them he was sponsored to South Korea and absorbed into a planning committee for the global conference. It was a great motivation. But we need something that is sustainable. And that's why, even from the last presenter, the matter of paradigm shift in the presentation, the pedagogy of learning will have to be seriously considered. We need to compel people to the repository, and the students need to be able to harvest their resources from there. WACREN region can also be a great motivator, because when resources are available across linguistics lines, across regions, we have this pool of resources that people can choose from. And I think as we promote this, librarians, first of all, need to be properly trained. The drivers of the platform, that's the ICT, the RENs need to be more visible, and then the lecturers themselves need to begin to see the repositories as important. But let me allow my other colleagues to make their own input. We will continue to have this challenge, but I think what WACREN is doing is to also encourage proper participation and engagement of both the Francophone and the Anglophone, so that we can more easily share our resources. And this can also go down even in the language of presentation of research outputs. Yeah, you have something.
Thank you. I didn't quite get the gentleman who spoke in French because my translation device wasn't working properly. But I think I did pick up some things about knowledge and languages and so on, which, interestingly, it was a topic we were discussing in the LibSense workshops. We were talking about this issue about whether, how easy would it be to find ways in which you can define the sorts of knowledge that you might find in different contexts in Africa. And in so doing, would they be the types of knowledge that you can share in these interoperable institutional repositories and share globally as well? So it's quite a tough question. And LibSense, actually, this is part of what they're doing of what WACREN is doing, and that is to try to come up with these frameworks, these interoperability frameworks, and to define these types of knowledge, and then to be able to make them globally available. However, I think that such definitions and that sort of work really has to be done locally by people who are knowledgeable about that, to be done locally and understood locally. Again, that would be in the sphere of librarians to lead that kind of knowledge work. That's my only comment. Thanks.
I would like to come in here because the language is really an issue. And this is an issue not just in Africa, but also in Europe. How many languages do we have in Europe? How many languages do we have in the European Union? And on the other side, with the repository, we have the individual learners. And they do it by their own speed, on their own interest. We want also to bring in the citizens. The citizens speak the local language only. But of course, Amharic is a bit more important maybe than as a small dialect, or also in Europe we have small dialects, and this is not then translated into these dialects or even languages, and is not translated. But I think this is a technical challenge, what the engineers should take on, how we can get a proper translation software, not just Google translators, but also, and if we use Google translators, that we can reach out to the smaller languages also. Then it was also the question about sharing of knowledge. This is quite an issue, and let's talk about the academic tribes and their academic territories. And I think we have to break up the academic tribes and territories to become multidisciplinary. Once we are multidisciplinary, automatically we start sharing knowledge, because as a sociologist, for example, you cannot know what is in science relevant. That means science people have to explain to sociologists what they meant. That means we get out of this comfort zone of a territory tribe. We just use some words and everyone understands. This is not the case anymore, because we become multidisciplinary teams, that we know that our counterparts really understand what we meant. Yeah.
Thank you very much to those who have responded to questions. We would like to allow a few more questions, just one more round. And then after that, I recommend you engage with our speakers during the break and get to interact with them more. So let's allow just a few, maybe 3. We didn't get any questions from ladies, so we're hoping that this time we would. Okay, there is one there, and another one at the back.
Oh, okay, it's working now. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Nombubele Shozi. I'm from the CSIR in South Africa. So my question is for the presenters who touched on repositories, institutional repositories. I'd just like to know, what considerations have you made in your repositories towards privacy and security, be it in terms of policies, technical measures that you have implemented, and also now looking at your respective countries, the laws, the privacy laws that those countries have, what impact are those having on your repositories? Thank you.
Good afternoon. Good afternoon. My name is Elinor Afo from University of Professional Studies. I understood from the various presenters about the topic being discussed as digital literacy skills. I wanted to know the level of training we are ready to put across for the stakeholders involved in these digital literacy skills. We assume that we are using electronic devices, and that, for that matter, users should have fair knowledge about how to go about all this. But it looks like we are not appreciating the platform because the lack of training is very, very obvious. So I want to know the way forward when it comes to digital trade platform. And then secondly, how are we looking at it with those who are disabled? How are they going to appreciate this platform as well? Thank you.
So are those all the questions we have? Okay, there's one. Oh.
Thank you very much. This goes to Dr. Nikoi about the reading list management policy. I'd like to know at what stage you are in implementing this policy. And if successful, what will it take for a countrywide application? Thank you.
Yes, we have another question near the camera.
Merci beaucoup. Ma question s'adresse à Stéphane. J'ai bien compris que créer un dépôt institutionnel ne suffit pas. Après, il faut savoir quelle utilisation est faite concernant les données qui sont hébergées dans le dépôt. Et par rapport à votre expérience, vous nous avez dit qu'il y a un système que vous avez mis sur pied qui vous permet d'évaluer les niveaux de voir de quel type d'application il s'agit. L'application qui vous permet d'évaluer l'utilisation des données qui sont dans votre dépôt.
The level of use of the data in your institutional repository, and that allows you to know where to get this information from and that information.
Merci. Je pense que je vais fermer la liste et passer la parole.
Okay, let me try. What considerations for intellectual... Pardon me? Yes. Of course, this is being observed as a general rule. Being open does not mean being careless or being violent. The Creative Commons license itself is sufficient. But apart from that, several institutions have their own policies. For instance, if a published work is to be uploaded, using the example of my school, the policy is that if that work is to get the title, the author, and probably the abstract, and you link to the main publisher. So you are not publishing the full text. But others are subjected to the Creative Commons license, which is sufficient in most cases. And some also agree that, well, they would like to modify the license to suit particular publications. That is allowed. For the thesis and dissertations, the university because it's submitted to the university for the award of a degree. And that one, that policy is in place. Concerning the national policy, Well, for instance, in Nigeria, we are subscribers to the World Intellectual Property Organization's copyright mandate. And so that is also taken care. The National Universities Commission directed that all institutions will have intellectual property offices. And what they do is to ensure that the matters of copyrights are well taken care of. I'm sure there may be one or two differences in the region, but in Nigeria, that is taken care of. In terms of the creation and use of metrics, Google Analytics can be used, and there are several others. Maybe when we meet later, we can discuss more, because there are variant types of metrics and display programs that you can use to be able to illustrate the use of the repository. I will allow my colleagues to respond. The digital training skill, reading list management policy, how it can be expanded to the national platform. Margaret, you want to say something? Yeah.
I would like to go for the first and the second question, how we handle this in Ethiopia. We are now in for the national policy and strategy on open access. We also will then move on to open data later on. But it's a political issue, as mentioned. It's not that easy to introduce open science and open data, but it's much easier in Ethiopia to start with the open access approach. What we also UIs, that each artifact coming or each object coming to the repository has to get a DOI. Then it's very clear who is the creator, from where does it come. And then, of course, we focus, like also at University of Jos, on the Creative Commons license, that this also needs to be added for each artifact or object. And of course, we focus on the FAIR principles, but the FAIR principles are also mentioned in the policy, in the national policy and strategy for the repositories, and the institutional policies and strategies, but somehow the national one bridges all the institutional ones, or is the umbrella for the institutional ones. If universities want to be more precise in the formulation of their policies and strategies, they are free to do so. Then coming to the second question, the digital training for the users. And this is also what we have started in Ethiopia, and this goes back to the Saigaya project as well. This is the carpentry. We offer carpentry trainings under the motto, increase digital literacy for researchers, the digital literacy training, what we offer through the carpentries, is a starting point. It's then up to each one to improve the digital literacy. That means, for example, if they learn how to code in R, after this workshop they have a glimpse, but then they have to use it and they have to apply it. And what we have done for the researchers now, that every last Friday a month we have an R hackathon, and this is more or less a coding. They use the coding language R to find out something from a database. We provide the database, all the groups they work on the same database. We do this on remote, and on remote, they introduced our ladies groups, that it's much easier to reach out. And it's very interesting that our ladies groups are very well received at the universities. And we are also informed that we should have more females in our ladies groups than males. But on the other side, at least it's a starting point, and we see it works very well, and we can build on that. That means our monthly R hackathons we offer to the R ladies groups. They should then offer this at their universities. The other point what we have done is we had a train-the-trainer workshop or instructor workshop for the librarians, that they also become the trainers for digital literacy, that they can then offer the carpentry trainings at, there are no limits. The carpentry is a voluntary organization. We can use it how we want to use it. As mentioned, we do it with the R hackathons. We can use it then also for other competitions and so on. This is for the disabled. This is also quite interesting in Ethiopia, because especially for the visually impaired people. And what I have learned, I'm not involved in that, but I have learned that there is already the software available that they can easily use the coding programs, what we are using. They could participate in our workshops. If we do an R hackathon, they easily can participate. They can read to the, I don't know, visibly impaired language.
Okay, thank you very much. There was a question about addressing digital literacy skills. What I need to say is that in looking at the whole question of skills, we should look at it, what do you call it, holistically in terms of academic skills or employability skills, so that one would feed into the other. So digital literacy skill is just one skill set. There are other skill sets, and we should look at the whole issue of academic literacy skills or employability skills, depending on how you want to call it. Now, there are two. If I start with the skills of the student, before I took up this job in the KNUST, I used to work for Aberystwyth University in Wales. And one of the things that we did was that when students are admitted into the university, before they come, we send them what we call a pre-arrival survey, where we ask a whole lot of questions so that we can know more about them. But there was a particular question that we asked them about their level of digital competence, so that they themselves tell us what they think they are capable of doing or not doing. It gave us some indication of the skill level at the point of entry into the university, so that it helps the library to devise academic skills training programs targeted at these particular skill gaps, and therefore equipping the students to attract to that. For those of you who are familiar with the information literacy framework, I think what we need is a digital literacy teaching framework as well, so that you can start from a low-level training and then upgrade to a higher-level training to address that particular problem. Many universities have adopted different approaches to how you actually develop the skills. The business of face-to-face teaching to equip is one. Universities like Manchester and Leeds have developed what they call a skills portal. So there's a skills portal, and the student actually can go there anytime and engage in what we call self-paced learning. There are small 5-minute learning objects that show you how to do specific things. It is made available so that you can actually pace yourself and actually use this. So that is the other way of developing a skills portal that students can develop the necessary skills that they want. In terms of academic staff, I think we will need to integrate this into what you call call it, the career development programs that we have in our individual university, so that there's a constant training when new tools are used, so that staff can equip themselves in terms of the knowledge and skills that they need to enhance their teaching and then their learning. There was a question about the disabled. Thankfully, my university set up a disabled committee just recently, and I'm part of that committee, and we are looking forward to address this particular issue about how to support disabled students when it comes to skills. I know there are a lot of adaptive technologies available there, and we intend to look in that direction when it comes to a disabled particular need. There was also a question about how we ensure compliance in terms of the reading lists that staff provide. It's early days, so you don't really want a situation where you start scaring the staff before you have even put the system in place. But I'm hoping that at some point, when we have actually implemented the system and there is academic and management buy-in of the tools, that will come to the point where we say that staff will be expected to update their reading lists every semester before they teach, so that we have very up-to-date current reading lists within our institutions that also informs the kind of resources that we provide for teaching and learning purposes. And these are some ideas that I can say are workable. Thank you very much.
So I think we'll end with that. Please join me to appreciate our presenters one more time, and then we can have the lunch break. Bon appetit.
It's up to you. So, before going to lunch, I would like to ask the speakers of the session to at least to come back before the session starts by 10 minutes, so that I can we can arrange at the server and so on. So please, speakers of the next session, please let's meet 10 minutes before the start of the second session. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. Just before we go, a quick announcement. We are returning here at 2:30 p.m. for the second session, and we have the buffet set up outside there at the foyer. So if you have this green sticker, or it could be yellow and I think red, if you have it, then you can join the buffet, then you move to this adjoining hall for a nice time there. If you don't have the sticker, please proceed to the registration desk, the ground floor, pick a sticker, and then you can come and join the buffet. All right, thank you very much. So
has WACREN enabled How has WACREN enabled you to unleash your potential? This year, it's time to go beyond. Beyond networks, building the applications and services that will help you. Beyond boundaries, developing cloud-based video conferencing services with meeting connectors hosted across the region to facilitate communication, collaboration, and e-learning. Beyond classrooms, bringing librarians and scholars together in communities of practice to build network repositories to support teaching, learning, and research. Beyond laboratories, enabling the high-speed connections and instrumentation which allow open science communities to thrive. Beyond limitations, investing in cybersecurity frameworks to encourage collaboration and end-user education while maintaining the security of our assets. Boundaries, networks, limitations, expectations, classrooms, gender, divisions. Welcome to WACREN 2019.